Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Your Spa Life Show. Spa life is a lifestyle that accepts that accomplishment and harmony coexist. The Spa and Spa Life, the SPA, is for Seek Power Always, that power within you to do your greater work in the world. I am so honored to have my next guest on the show, which is Brenda Neckvatal, who is an international award-winning human resource professional and crisis management expert. We need that more today than ever before. She has been featured in Forbes and Inc. She works to help develop rising HR professionals and business owners to sort through the chaos and identify the best people solutions for their company. Brenda, welcome to the show.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Diane.
Well, I just want to get right into it because, if anything has been, a change of people's perspective is the 2020 pandemic threw people off in so many different ways. And, one of the things that as you went into being an HR professional, you had to really develop being able to think critically.
Yes.
How is it that, this shifted how you do your work, and how are you helping people to really look at being remote workers?
The big shift that took place actually happened. Well, for me, it started in January because January 2020, because when we heard about the coronavirus outbreak, with global travel and global, I knew it was going to come here really quickly. So it was a matter of, I actually scrambled and got myself set up first. It's like putting your air mask on first on the plane before you assist somebody else, right?
Yes.
That kind of thing. And it was just it was a lot of staying on top of everything. And kind of you had to, the way I looked at it is, we talked about critical thinking, is you can't always listen to what's going on with the media. You had to do a lot of digging. So I was on the phone with local health officials, asking questions and doing as much of a deep dive as I could to get ahead of this, because I knew what was going to happen was all these other companies that hadn't been watching this were going to be in a crisis situation. And that's exactly actually what had happened. So by the time it hit, starting in March, I was already doing, webinars. I was contracted through another company to do these webinars on this particular subject. And I mean, literally the first one we did, we had 500 people on, because they're all trying to figure out how do we do this?
Right.
How do we exist?
Right. And this is so important for people to look ahead, right? See what's happening, to be able to look, 2-3 steps down the road, kind of see where you're going. And I love how you talked about how, the fear, right? There's the fear and uncertainty, and how that can just derail people. And when people are listening to everything that's happening without having all the facts, without knowing everything that's going on, you have to be able to trust your own wisdom, right? You have to discern, right, what's good for you, what's good for your company. And, you keep your ear to the ground of what's happening out in the world. But so many people were in reaction mode versus taking the time to respond, to really look at what are we faced with. And, fear is such a big thing that happens with people. And you talk a lot about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Can you talk a little bit more about just the fear aspect alone? Because I think that there's a lot of people that they're still in fear, right? They're just waiting for, the next shoe to drop, when are things going to be back to normal, all of these things. How can they look at things at a bigger picture and evolve beyond the fear?
Yeah, absolutely. So when people are afraid of something, there's an attachment to a truth, right? And so if you look at things from a critical thinking perspective, and this is just what I've learned. I mean, I haven't studied any of this. Is just what I see over and over again. I look internally and find it myself, is that when we're afraid of something, we're afraid of an actual outcome of something. And what we need to remind ourselves is that, first off, we don't know what the outcome is. And then we also have to look at, well, what are what are we afraid of losing? Once we acknowledge that, at least in a leadership perspective, then we'll be able to say, okay, so I'm afraid of losing this, but where do I have control in that? And then the only thing you can control in life is you. That's it. That's all. You can only control what you can control. That's it. And it will always come back down to you. So being uncomfortable is about just buckling down and getting through it, right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because when you're honest with yourself, when you're really, really grounded and you're just moving through whatever it is that you're moving through, you learn stuff about yourself. You learn that you have way more grit than you thought you did. A lot of times people don't want to be uncomfortable is because they don't like, discomfort. I mean, let's face it, we're Americans. We do not like being uncomfortable. And that's been one of the challenges with COVID and this whole lockdown and wearing masks and, living a different lifestyle, is that it's outside of what we're comfortable with. And so some people put the mask on because, they are in fact fearful, and that works. And some people, put the mask on because they're, being good stewards and they're doing their part to, do this. And other people that put the mask on simply because they have to stay compliant. There's a wide variety of, beliefs out there on this. And there's no concrete known that I think any one group of people or anybody as a whole can really say, like, okay, this is very consistent. There's a lot of inconsistency, and inconsistency breeds fear too, right?
Right.
And change, rapid, fast change. We don't like change either. We
Right.
like things to stay the way they are, and people are longing for the days to go back to what they once were. And I think we'll get there eventually, but it's going to take a little while yet. Because, once mask mandates are going to be lifted, there's still going to be a lot of people that are not ready to take that level of change and go back on. And that yet again also promotes fear. So,
Right.
being comfortable with uncomfortable is also not just about releasing what you know and getting through it. It's also about being comfortable with being imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And accepting yourself as imperfect, and really just having a level of confidence about being imperfect. You make a mistake, screw it, all right, I made a mistake. Woo, So that's a lot about being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Right. I appreciate you talking about inconsistencies, because that comes up a lot where, especially now where, like you said, there's so many different ways to look at things. I mean, for, some people it's, out of fear that they're, let's say, wearing masks. There's other people
Right.
where it's like, what happened to personal freedom and HIPAA and privacy and getting to make decisions for yourself and your own health. I mean, there's a wide gamut on all of those things. How does that apply to, from an HR perspective, as an employer or an employee who even has, as an entrepreneur that has people, contractors, and taking all of those things in consideration? How is it that you can balance, the, mandates, and be able to also let people choose for themselves what is good for their own health? How does that apply to the workplace?
Whoa, that's a loaded question. That is the proverbial puzzle that everybody's been dealing with. So, first and foremost is that, under normal circumstances, if we did not have, actually, we're beyond pandemic, we're actually an endemic, right? We just still use the word pandemic, but since it has gone as global as it has, it's actually considered an endemic now. So, when we're in that situation to where mass life is at risk, then there's certain things that kick in. So we've pointed our compass towards the guidance of the CDC, and they really are the best place to get that kind of information from. Then what has really happened too, which is kind of interesting, is that for the first time in history of something ever like this happening in wide scale, is that the federal government has directed the states to manage their own citizens as far as, control and measures and what governors feel they should and shouldn't do. That was all pushed down from our previous president. And that opened up the opportunity for a lot of states to say, hey, listen, we feel that we need to put additional measures in place, meaning we need to, we should be looking at paid sick leave as being mandated here in the state. And that goes above and beyond what the Fed is doing, right? So there's a lot of that legislation. And then you had states like Georgia that took a look and said, well, we need to start looking at protecting businesses, because this really, truly, if people get sick by going into the business, it's not their fault, because nobody can control this, right? And so they put those laws in place. So it's really kind of interesting to see how the state has really taken a role very differently, because usually it's the other way around. the Fed said something and the states kind of come together and they do something like-minded. Here it's been a little bit different. It goes the other direction. So, with the American with Disabilities Act, and with OSHA, when they get to a point, when we started taking temperatures and started, tracking how people were feeling, that goes completely against everything traditional human resources and employment law, because you may not be set up for HIPAA. You have to abide by some HIPAA provisions, and it's a medical diagnosis. And so now that with the American Disabilities Act, under that direct threat provision that they have, that has opened the door for those types of new behaviors, new technology, and new things to come in. So it does get complicated, but each state is now putting a different level, I don't want to say pressure, but requirement on companies. Like, Montana may have different regulations than Maryland, for instance. Maryland is actually really tightening the belt. And then you look at Texas, they've gone away with the mask mandate. So it's really kind of interesting to see this patchwork behavior throughout the entire US as to how each state is going to handle it. And I was just in Texas a little while ago, and they don't have signs requiring you to wear a mask in common areas. They have signs that say, please be considerate to other people and consider wearing a mask in other areas. And that was before the mandate lifted. Right. So yeah, it's just interesting. And so that is a challenge. And then when you've got companies that operate in multi-states, then you have to learn what every state is doing, and you have to, your people have to abide by that over there. So it literally is kind of, managing COVID has become a full-time job in and of itself. And plus you have just the normal stuff that you have to deal with.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because when governors started making, their mandates, typically they go through legislator, and those are only for emergency circumstances, 30 to 60 days. So the fact that these things went longer, I think that's what really had people kind of, put up the, whoa, what's going on? Who's actually making law around here? And,
exactly.
And how do you interpret it? So it's kind of been a little bit of, like you said, like this wild, wild west of, where you are and how you look at it. And so as a business owner, are you looking at how do you appease everybody? When you've got people, you really can't, right? You have to kind of, that opens up a whole nother box of what's going on. I do like the whole, like, being considerate and people being able to, find out the comfort level of people around them and be able to utilize some common sense and utilize something along that versus, the mandates of you have to do this, because this is just one thing, right? We are humans who walk around with all kinds of different viruses. That didn't just start last year. There's colds, influenza, all the other things that are out there. I think getting to the point where you're afraid to be next to another human is also another level, because in business and life, you're connecting with other people. So as people look at some of these bigger social issues and how they're communicating in business, how are you guiding them in some of that muckiness, if you will?
So I think we've actually found the third topic that you can't talk about at work. First, it was politics and religion, which we had politics all last year. Actually, the last 4 years, we've had even longer than that. So politics, religion, and now COVID, I think, because, and it's amazing the prejudices and the beliefs that people have about, what happens if, somebody gets the vaccine, somebody who doesn't get the vaccine. What about the anti-vaxxers and blah, 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 right?
Yeah, all of it.
First off, just understand, you said it earlier, you're never going to make everybody happy. So stop trying, right? Stop trying. As far as I'm concerned, businesses, their number one responsibility is not to make profit. It's to make business, to keep the doors open so that they can keep payroll going. That is the responsibility of a business, right?
Yes.
And so you go into business, and you hire people. Now that's your responsibility. So, but people are going to come up with these ideas and notions of how other people should live their life or how the company should be run. Like, we all have opinions, and some of us hang on to them a little bit stronger than others. You're not ever going to appease that. It's just not going to be possible. You can't say one thing to one person and turn around and say something to somebody else and have them be completely different and everybody love you. You just have to figure out what's right. And the way I look at it is that if the company is doing what they feel is in the best interest and they are acting in the best interest, they're adhering to the guidelines, they're doing everything they can to continue to bring money in to keep the doors open so people have food on their tables. They're working in an honorable, ethical manner. Not everybody necessarily will agree with that. That's fine. Those that are not on board have an option. And everybody has the option to go ahead and choose the path of their own life. And I think that's a key piece of that. But then you also have individuals that have very strong beliefs about things. I've known companies that I had one guy, he said he wasn't going to hire anybody unless they were all a particular political party. I won't say which one it is, but it doesn't matter. But that's what, and I said, well, you can't do that. I said, you can actually, because there's nothing that actually protects political affiliation. But you could be missing out on the talents of other people just because they're not of the same political party. To me, that doesn't make sense. Right. And so not to mention, you could maybe, kind of depending, as you'd have to look at your numbers, that could be a disparity as well, just depending on how many applicants you get. So it kind of gets, there's some people that do that. But that's, again, when I talk about how they're so attached to their opinions, that's an example of how they execute based on that, right? There are people out there, I give a lot of, I've given about, maybe delivered 5 of these now. 5, I get contracted to speak in different webinars, and I've talked a lot about mandating the coronavirus vaccine, the vaccine for COVID. And it's amazing how many people ask that question. It's like, so at the end of the day, yeah, we can mandate it and fire people who haven't taken it. And I'm like, well, technically you can. You've got a mountain of things that you have to talk about with your attorney to protect your company from doing something like that, because there are, protective provisions for people with disabilities and, religious. But the other side of it is that, how do you keep a safe place for your company? But then the other part of the conversation is like, yeah, but how do we know that the vaccine is really going to respond to that person when we only know that it's 90% effective and it's not 100% guarantee and it only lasts for maybe 2 years at best? And,
right.
It's just like,
trial.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. And it's like, what about people who are concerned about, putting something that's been pushed through the FDA that fast into the system, and we really don't even know what that could mean later on down the road. We don't even know what the virus means to people later on down the road.
Right.
People who've had it.
So at this point, can employers mandate that it seems like that's so many violations of HIPAA, and like you said, religious and personal things, and it being a trial and all the things that come into that. Can that actually be a condition of employment?
It can, under certain circumstances, and it's not going to be administered unilaterally. That's the big thing to know. So if anybody's considering it, the only thing I would say would be to talk to your employment attorney. Do not walk that path alone. If you walk that path alone, you are going to get yourself into major hawk. Right, and right. I have a person that I work with who has a great phrase, and I wish I figured it for myself, that, if you're going to be an employer that goes to court for something, don't be the employer that goes to court the first time for something. Then you become a landmark case at that point. So, we're going to see more COVID litigation. We're going to see this vaccine is going to get litigated in many different ways. It absolutely will. Everything from, you can't discriminate, like I mentioned earlier, against American with Disabilities Act and against religious exemptions. Those have to be carved out. I think there's also going to be consumer's choice involved here as well, and rightfully so. I don't believe that everybody should be forced to take a vaccine unless it was like as severe as polio. Polio was a really bad, very, very bad condition, right? We still don't know enough about COVID and the long-term effects of it. And who knows? It could be the next polio. I have, vaccine. I have no idea. Right.
Well, it's
And
hard to believe that's the case when you've got something that has like a 98% recovery rate. And, people that have pre-existing conditions obviously have more impact. But again,
absolutely.
one of the reasons why there was HIPAA and personal laws and having things where your health was protected was because, your health is as different as your thumbprint, right? I mean,
Right.
people have so many different things and reasons of
Right.
why people look at that, and to put that into the hands of an employer who probably doesn't know your history or your family or things like that, that's taking on a lot of liability, and
Absolutely.
that's crazy.
Yep. And nor are they legally entitled to do so. So,
Right.
yeah. And you know what? And here's the thing is the big question now is that physicians are actually looking at individual. And I know a couple people are going through this. Like I know one person, he actually had a softball sized blood clot that showed up in his lungs after he had COVID. um that was very early on, and it was very abnormal that it happened. So the question that doctors are trying to figure out is, can they rule out COVID or do they rule it in, right? And I think that's a lot what is going on in the medical profession is that all these I know two other people right now that are undergoing testing for very odd type of conditions at a younger age, that the physicians are trying to figure out, do we rule it in or do we rule it out? And I think now the rest of the world is going to be looking at that. Almost every abnormal condition other than some of the at a younger age, these weird things are starting to show up, like
Right.
I'm like, I want to give an example, but I can't because I promised I keep my mouth shut. This is what an HR person does when you're trying to keep a secret and you're like, no, I can't come up with that example. You got to come up with
Right.
something better. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
oh, no, can't use that one either. Darn it.
Yeah. Well, and it becomes, a conversation of the chicken or the egg. Like, is it
Yeah.
pre-existing conditions? Is it, because you had a vax, now you've got problems that are happening? I mean, it's wild that we've gotten to a place in society where people are taking vaccinations on video, right? And it's like, and trying to sway people one way or the other. And it's like this personal decisions become like up for debate. And so it's really
Yeah.
a web of decisions. And I love the advice that you're giving to people of like, it's all in everything, right? It's not just one thing fits
Yeah.
all. You have to have a lot of considerations, and what is the culture of your company and your community, and where do we take personal responsibility and
Yep.
making our own decisions that work for us and our family, because it's still
Yes.
America and we still have freedom, and we get to make some of those choices, right?
Yeah. And, guarantee you 3 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to be driving down the street, mask free, sitting in our cars, and we're going to see billboards of, advertisements like, did you take the coronavirus and, the very first dose of the coronavirus back in blah, 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 blah from this company. And, if so, you could have a class action lawsuit. I mean, I promise you it's
Absolutely.
coming, that
I'm with you.
all of this litigation it's getting ready to happen. And,
Well, and
it
there's
is.
liability for owners of companies too, where it's like you mandated this in your company and all your employees had side effects from it. Where's the liability in that? I mean, there's going to
Yeah,
be that's a big wormhole that
absolutely.
people are going to go in because of that.
Yeah. And I think, and this sounds probably a little cold and corporate, but at some point in time, and that's the big thing that leaders are going through. I mean, they're just constantly in their head, like their brains are being bounced around back and forth because of this. It's like we have to do this yet, but we can't do this. And yet we want to make sure that people are taken care of, but we also don't want to be a source of it being spread. It's like, how do you do all this? And the only thing that I can say is that if you are doing the best that you can under the circumstances, that is all you can do. And at some point in time, you have to let kind of go of that and just keep moving forward, because the world is moving forward. And if you keep thinking in a certain way, like if you keep trying to solve this puzzle that is unsolvable everywhere else, you're just going to be stuck, and the rest of the world is going to keep on going. You have a business to run, you have people that you got to take care of, or you got benefits that you have to make sure they can get paid. You have to keep moving. It is vital that businesses keep moving. And to some people that are like, I don't see why they're doing all this because they don't really care, blah, blah. Ignore all that. You have to, you have to ignore all that. As business leaders, you have to keep moving forward. Our economy depends on it. Our livelihoods depend upon it. Our unemployment depends upon it.
Right.
Everything depends upon us as a world continuing to move forward regardless of the obstacles that are in our way, because honestly, there's going to be something else down the road.
Absolutely. I hear you. I totally relate to what you're saying, because when I worked uniform patrol as a police officer, it's like you have like 3 seconds to make a decision. Like you have to make a quick decision.
Yeah.
It's the best decision. You take all the different circumstances and you make that.
Yeah.
And then, there's always someone who does that Monday morning quarterbacking where it's like, well, why didn't you do this? Or how about this? Or do you consider this? It's like, do you realize that I had 3 seconds and I made the best decision I could in this? And I mean, that's what I do with my consulting with my clients as well. It's like, you know what? You got to look at the whole picture. When, as the owner of your company, as the leader, you have to be the visionary. You have to look at the big picture and say, you know what? How are we going to survive and be here? How is it that being, small business is the backbone of America? I mean, we have to be looking at these long-term things. And I think if people know, especially, when you build a culture and you say like, hey, this is what we stand for, and your employees and your culture is behind that, the majority, I believe, are going to realize that you are making the best decision that you can. And, there's always going to be those outliers that no matter what you do, they're going to have an issue with it, and it's not going to work.
Yeah. And that's part about being in leadership, is that it is lonely at the top. And and you're absolutely right, because everybody who's doing all that stuff is not walking the path with you. And that's why people like me in HR, we walk the path with you. Our number one job is to protect the CEO. That's what we're supposed to do, right? Whether anybody really looks at it that way or not, that is what we have to do. Because the last thing I want is my CEO of my company sitting up on a stand going, swearing in and saying stuff that they really don't know anything about.
Right.
So that's a big piece. And if HR and the CEOs do not have, a good working relationship, then HR can't do its job. The CEO is going to get in trouble. Matter of fact, I did a podcast, our 100th podcast on our show, actually, which is the best practices in human resources. We did our 100th episode. I flew out to California, met with Bedros Keuilian. We did the episode in his studio. It was great. And he's the owner of Fit Body Boot Camp. And this man has had to pivot. I mean, look at fitness centers, right? Yeah. You talk about speed of decisions. And within a week, they went from having to close down, 700 and some odd franchises temporarily across the US and converted over to a virtual fitness program. Companies didn't move that fast, Right. They didn't. And he's worked harder than ever to keep his business going. They're not selling franchises right now, but they were like one of the largest. They made Fortune 5,000. I think they were like 129 or something like that, 149 on the list of fastest growing franchises because of the ingenuity. But then this hits. That puts a screeching stop to that, right? So it's a matter of, well, how do we do this, and how do we keep meeting the needs of customers? Because yes, we had a very sharp dip in unemployment, but 75% of the country was still working. Mm-hmm. And I think we lose sight of perspective. I think we lose sight of that perspective. Yes, we had 25% people suddenly go into unemployment, but 75% of the country still works, and they still have needs to meet, and they're the ones that are keeping us going. So what do we do to support that as well?
And that just goes to show to the perseverance and grit of the workers, right? Of people who, this is sometimes generational, the businesses that we had, and people, and for some people, working at home actually became a benefit. They got to, spend more time with their family. There was less commute time. People figured out ways to be efficient. There was a lot of things that came with that. And actually, before I forget, one of the things I love asking my guests is, our home environments really affect us in a lot of ways, and we have different experiences in our bedroom versus our office or our kitchen. So what is your favorite room in your home and why?
Oh, my favorite room in my home is not this one. I spend a lot of time in this. I love it. My favorite room in my home is actually downstairs. I have it. So my house was built in 1906. It was, I believe, the dining area. And I converted it into like a creative studio. And I get to look out. So I have this big drafting table that sits flat. I get to look out into my yard, which I try and keep up really nice. It looks great in the beginning of the season. And then it looks kind of mildly okay towards the back end because I get busy and can't keep it up. But yeah, I just sit there. And that's where I create, and that's where I invent, and that's where I don't do all the stuff that I do in here. And so that by far is my favorite. I would say that's my favorite room. My second favorite place is the front porch, because I have a screened in front porch that sits out and looks out over the water. And we were out there last night having cocktails and great conversation, and it was awesome.
I love it. I love asking that question because I find that the most successful people have created spaces, that really inspire them, that
Yeah.
are beautiful, that really allow them to do their greatest work. And it's just so fascinated with how different the spaces are. But the common theme is that they're inspiring, right? They make you feel good. There's something really, great about that. And I know some people are going to be looking at you and go, wow, you're this like amazing HR, you're the HR lady. And, you probably, was born that way. And I know we like to show about the journey, right? And there are disempowering things in our life. There are things along the way. And I'd love for you to talk about just some things that you realize about your learning and how that actually allowed you to pivot. Because a lot of times people don't see what was the path that got you to where you are at, what were the things that held you back, and the things that you persevered to get beyond that.
So that's awesome. I love how you bring this up. So, for me, I actually very early on had a learning disorder that went undiagnosed for a very, very long time. I was tested for it back in the 70s, but if you look at back in the 70s, we didn't know nearly as much about dyslexia as we do today. And I have this form of it where I couldn't put things together, but I was extremely and I still am highly mechanically inclined. Like I can take things apart and put them back together and not know how to do it, and they'll still work. Um, I I was socially awkward as a result of that. And that's kind of interesting that I got into human resources and I'm really good at understanding human behavior, but that comes from my survival mechanism, because I had to interpret behavior to figure out how to make it in this world, because I didn't comprehend what people were saying on a regular basis. I didn't comprehend what I was reading on a regular basis. And I got bullied a lot when I was a kid. My dad he was a hospital administrator for 23 years in a very small town, beautiful town, but small town nonetheless. And he had his share of political drama and in the area. He helped grow and actually create some possibility that took place in that town for many years. But he got a lot of opposition and just did his thing. I mean, he just charged forward regardless of what everybody thought. Well, I kind of took the backlash of that, which is crazy, but that's what happens in small towns. And so it was a beatdown. It was a beatdown for many, many years. And it wasn't until I was 32 that somebody pointed out that I did something that he did. And he's like, have you ever been tested for dyslexia? And I said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, back in the 70s, I was a kid. I actually remember going for this battery of tests with these other kids that I knew clearly had other issues, because I watched the teachers have to work with them special. And so I got retested and they said, you've been battling this for a long time. And I'm like, boy, no wonder I felt like a square peg in a round hole my whole life. So I learned how to reread as an adult. So I went from being a CDF student at the age of 32 and jumping back into school being a 4.0 and graduating going back and getting my bachelor's degree with as a magna cum laude. So, and then I went on and I got my MBA.
Yeah, that is so great. And I love to hear these stories because, people don't see, the things that are happening. They get to you. They see the shininess at the end of the tunnel, right? Not that you're at the end of it, you're always in it, right? There's always the shifting and changing and things that happen. But I think that there's an appreciation for particularly entrepreneurs and business owners that they see that there are obstacles. There are, pivots off the road, and how do you get back on the road, and what are the things that you can do that. And I think when they can hear that, you can realize that you're going to be knocked off the road a lot of times, right? There's going to be a lot of things that happen, and whether it's a a pandemic, an endemic, change, all those things that happen. And this is, all the fundamental questions that come up for HR about, asking more questions and being able to look at how is it that we can make the changes and to keep moving forward. And I love, I can't remember who had said to me about the road to failure is on the way to the road to success, that you're going to have these setbacks, but it's the same road. It's not that you've gotten off that track. It's like, this is part of it. This is how it happens. Right. Yeah. So that is definitely part of it. And in our theme this year, we talk a lot about being a force for good. And I'd love to know, how is it that you are being a force for good in the world?
I love that question. So about 5 years ago, well, a little bit longer than that, about 7.5, almost 8 years ago, one of my former coworkers had come up with an idea as a team building event to say, it would be great if we donated our time as HR people and we would, go volunteer our time and work with veterans and help them do their resumes and, give them mock interviews and just let them, use us as a soundboard. And I absolutely loved that. I thought that was a fantastic. Well, nothing happened with it. Well, when I left that job and I went back into an HR seat versus just being a consultant for a company, I decided it's like, I want to do that. But something inside of me in my gut, and I don't know why, but I tend to think it's very divine, said, you need to do this with the SEALs. So I looked into it. So I reached out to the Navy SEAL Foundation, told them what I wanted to do, and they got me connected with the Honor Foundation. And in 3 weeks, we launched the very first course on the East Coast. And it is an executive transition course that at the time was 16 weeks. It's now cut down to about 13. And we take them through discovering their purpose and doing a lot of very uncomfortable introspective work and look at themselves, to giving them the tools on how to build their LinkedIn profile, how to do the resume, how to interview, and then teaching them other things like corporate culture and a little bit of business acumen, not a lot, but a little. And I think we could, if there's a chance that we could do a little bit more on that one, I would strongly recommend that we do. But I focused in on that with another foundation called Phase 2, which, I wound up shutting down. Just because I think the need had passed for the time being. And so that's what I do. I dedicate about 32 weeks out of my life coaching. Majority of them is Navy SEALs. I do also work in our North Carolina campus where I help coach, individuals, the Marines that come through from MARSOC. And we do the same program down there. So yeah, I take on a couple every year. I did about Sometimes I'll take on a special case as well. Somebody who's, they just need a little extra attention. And I'll help between like 4 to 5 people through these courses. And it's a blast. I love doing it. I love doing it. And I've made some amazing relationships with some incredible people along the way. And very big part of volunteering in the Navy SEAL community as a whole. I expanded into that as well. It's just great. I love it.
I love it. Well, thank you for this service for our vets. It's so important. Transition is so hard, right? It can be really, it's a totally different mindset. And to make those transitions smoothly and successfully, people like you really, really make that happen. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. Well, thank you so much for being here on the show. And I know that people are going to want to stay in contact with you. How can they do that?
One thing that they can do is they can visit my website at brendathehilady.com. If they want to follow me on social media, they can find me Brenda the HR Lady at Instagram, Facebook, Clubhouse. I'm on Clubhouse 3, sometimes 7 times a week. I'm starting to do some more sessions and more rooms with different individuals, and I love doing that. Oh my gosh, Clubhouse is great. If you haven't gotten into it, definitely get into it. You can also find me over on LinkedIn just by my name. And it's all sorts of, if you start Googling Brenda Neckvatal or Brenda the HI Lady, I kind of come up. I'm the only one in the country. I'm not hard to find.
Well, we'll talk about a great niche. That's awesome.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom here today. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You got it. And to our listeners, thank you for being here. It's you of who we are here to inspire, to help get positive messages out into the world. Please share this. Give us your 5-star rating and your comments and any questions that you have. I'm sure you've got those burning HR questions that are coming up. Make sure that you tag both Brenda and myself. We're happy to answer any that you have and to get this positive message out into the world. It is so important for us to continue to share, to find out where we have things in common, where we can improve, and be that positive force for good in the world. So until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.